the hard to find parts for Aerostars and what he's got going, and let him talk a little bit about that. Roger Olin came up to me a minute ago and told me about and I'm not sure of the details. He's trying to get signatures to get a Aerostar mounted at Van Nuys Airport, correct? Yes? Okay. And so see him about signing up. Just all he's looking for is your endorsement.
What are you trying to do? Put an Aerostar on a pole.
Put an Aerostar on a pole.
You got an Aerostar, Jimmy, you ain't using? I got one.
I'll bet Roger's got a warehouse full of Aerostars he can put on that pole. Hey, Roger, when are you going to make those parts available to the rest of the world? Never?
over the years, but I want to dedicate it to Ted and the Aerostar. I want to have a group of airplanes show up and people, customers, people, employees, vendors, and so forth, and a dedication ceremony.
Well, that sounds like a great idea. Thank you. So see Roger about the opportunity, please. That's what? Oh, yeah, the food going to and from. Yeah. We'll start our maintenance panel, and I've got Joel Stout, and I've got Don Smith, and I've got Jimmy sitting up here. Bill Bridges is sitting back there for when it really gets to be tough questions, but he's got his eyes covered. And of course, Jim Christie's here, and he'll answer anything that he can from the factory point of view. So who wants to start with the first question? And you can ask anything you want about your Aerostar and tell us about what's going on, what you've come across. And also you can ask any question you'd like about anything you've seen here in the last few days, last 2 days of the maintenance seminar. Doug?
I have a persistently stiff strut, major strut, that just seems to be far more extended than it should. Like, is there an easy way for, say, somebody like me to relieve some of that pressure?
No.
You gotta jack it up.
His question was, he's got a main landing gear strut that continues to be way up there, and he can't. Is there any way that an aircraft owner that's not an A&P can adjust that strut? The answer is no.
You always have to jack it up too.
Yeah.
You definitely want to jack it up, have it up on jacks, and set the pressure as per the POA or the maintenance manuals while it's up, never touch it on the ground. Because you can let just a little bit of nitrogen out and it's going to fall on its face, and you're in trouble. So,
Okay, and I would need the pressure.
yeah, you need gauges.
I have access to jacks,
But, I have access to jacks, but not the pressure device.
Yeah, you need pressure gauges, and A&P should do it. So.
Chad?
You gotta send that one off. You want to tell me you do both at the same time. Is it always high?
No, it's okay, Chad. No, pick up the mic and talk.
Is it always high, or does it change with temperature? Like, does it?
it doesn't change significantly with temperature.
Okay, because sometimes what I found is that, a lot of times they'll start leaking a little bit of fluid, things like that. And people will just they'll keep putting nitrogen in for a while. It'll move up and down quite significantly with temperature and weight differences because you have a higher ratio of nitrogen in than supposed to be. So that's,
Yeah,
you're not having that, it's just always high.
Yeah, no, it sits down fine when I have weight on it, like when I fill the aux tank and overfill the fuselage tank, it'll sit down just fine.
it's lighter.
Yeah.
It's
It's
going to be
lighter,
higher
and then
than.
it's quite a bit, I mean, unfortunately, it's all like this.
Yeah. So in that case, what I would probably do is maybe not overhaul the struts. There's a lot of different factors. So there's a little valve at the bottom of the strut that you put the nitrogen in. If you open that up, there's hydraulic fluid coming out of it, it means that you have a leak internally. Okay? So if you, or if you have nitrogen on the top. If you don't, maybe just resurfacing the strut with hydraulic fluid. Yeah, I mean, you might be able to get away with just resurfacing it, but if you got a fluid or air in the wrong spot, then you have a flood in this capacity.
Yeah, Don and I saw that, before I had the strut overhaul, when I took it to your shop, when I was bringing it up from Florida, I had a nice perfect spray coming out. Big spray.
Yeah. And sometimes it's easier if you do those struts.
Yeah, you can say, yeah, but you gotta have it up on jacks. And then just the quick look to see if the fluid and the nitrogen are changing places. You know, just crack the trailer valve, and if you get that, it's hydraulic fluid, then you know inevitably what you're gonna have to do. You're gonna have to resurface it, change seals, and stick it back together. And then we always, I'm sure all of us, have a Y connection. One line coming off the nitrogen bottle going to a splitter, and you do both struts at the same time with the tires off the ground with a regular.
Right.
And
That's
so,
just to that, that rival as well.
let them soak there for maybe 5-10 minutes,
Okay.
and then close them off.
You're just saying you're recommending an AMP because it's not, I mean, legally it's not required to have an AMP do it, right?
Yes, it is.
There's only certain things filed in here.
I thought that was included in part
I
43.
gotta get a part out for a guy.
Yeah, that's, I just looked
Hey,
up.
Jesse.
You are, but maybe you shouldn't.
There's a judgment call. Personally, you know, these are her limitations, right?
It's actually kind of scary what the liberals allow to do.
Use the microphone.
I got a follow-up.
Hold it. Chad was next.
Okay, electric AC. I just keep hearing all these different alternators and a bunch of different opinions, but I need to stupefy it for myself. I want to run my engines at idle, and I want to run my AC. Which alternator do I put on the air?
Well, right now, we only got one choice for alternators for, you got electric AC. Electric AC, the only thing you do is main power alternators, because National Airports is not building alternators anymore. With the National Airport alternators, you can run an idle and still run AC. You can't do it with the Crystal lights and National Airport. So the only choice you have are the plane powers, and when I read the plane power instructions for multi-engine installation, you have to use their regulators and wire it by their diagram. But you have to get field approval to do that, from what I understand that.
But nobody has rebuilt National.
There's a fellow repairing National Airport alternators, Aerotech in Kentucky, will repair them, but they can't give you an overhaul ticket or an E-130 with it, say they're overhauled, because they don't have the paperwork to do that. They don't have the approval to do that.
Also, the first, you're laying those mics down. Hold it up. There you go. The first place to start, Chad, is with the current draw of the air conditioning system. When you charge that air conditioning system, I learned a long time from Jim Christie, a long time ago, 55 amps of current. It doesn't matter how much Freon that is, but when that thing's drawing 55 amps of current, you're done. You overcharge it, you'll never get an alternator to handle it at idle.
And overcharge doesn't cool as well as undercharge.
There you
So
go.
If you overcharge the Freon, it's not gonna cool as well.
But just have
If
to
it's
find out
overserved.
what that draw currently is.
Pardon me?
So, first thing to do is to find out what that draw currently is.
That's right. Plug it into an APU on the ground with the air running with a low fan and see what the current draw is from the APU.
Are you talking about electric ACs and electric?
That's correct.
Anywhere from 35 to 45 amps is what I usually see, depending upon the compressor, is dragging, if it's worn out or starting to wear out, or I found a DC shop in our little town next to Dothan that I gave them those.
Hand him the
electric
microphone.
motors. He can go through.
Good God.
He can bring the armatures, he can get the OEM, brushes, and he put it on a load test for me. He built a little thing, loaded it up, got the data on it, and I give it to him, and he'd be pulling 50 amps, 55 amps at a specific load. And I said, can you fix that? He'd run it through, do his thing, do the same load test, and have it down to 32 to 35 amps. So he could knock 10 to 15 amps off.
So without those plain power alternators, I've got to run.
It's tough.
I've got to run.
Keep my power up.
Still got around 1,300 RPM, I think.
And just buy the brake pads. Keep some brake pads with you.
Since we're on the air conditioner subject, I got the Type C engine-driven air conditioning system.
Yep.
Completely recharged the system, I think the computation was like 3.9 pounds of
That's too much.
That's too much.
Too much.
2.25. Where's Jim Christie?
2.2.
Okay, 2.2. So we put
Oh.
in 2.2, and then my mechanic goes into the tail, and he's looking at the little sight glass, and he's looking for bubbles.
Can't do that.
That's what I needed to hear.
Can't do that. I just charge you by weight. 2.2 by weight, and that's it.
Thanks.
Are you using R12 or 130?
Jim Christie, do you concur 2.2 pounds of Freon in the engine-driven air conditioning system?
I don't know the answer.
Okay.
Well, we're using 134A and we're using 2.2 pounds.
Okay.
No, you can't even know.
Next question. Go ahead, Larry.
I wanted to jump the Strut issue. What I heard from the experts, I heard to help with the stability of struts, you know, they go up and down temperature, weight, and all that, that adding a little more, I think the manual calls out for 12 cubic inches of hydraulic when they're surfaced.
CCs.
Oh, it's CCs? Okay. Adding a little more, stabilize it, but there's a certain point, or is that something you're going to go right by the number in the book?
I go by the number in the book.
And it's 12 CCs?
Yeah. That's roughly pretty close to 8 ounces, I think, the last time I
There's another way to do it too. You push the floating piston all the way down, fill the strut up with as much hydraulic fluid as you can, put the strut together, and then we bleed them. So.
Then you put your 12 cc's on top of that.
I just bleed it with a can with clear hose. And then when the last stroke up, it usually takes 4 or 5 strokes, but the last stroke up, I'll leave about a half inch of chrome showing. And then cap the top. And then after I cap the top, then we'll go back and put the 390 pounds of nitrogen or whatever the airplane requires. I think 601 page is 390. I know you use what they say. I know you use what
I use a little more, and I use a thumb whip. Like I'll push a strut up until my thumb will start to squeeze in there, and that's my calibrated gauge.
Yeah, that's calibrated. But is it the same procedure you use for the nose as well as the mains?
No, the nose is I think the pressures are a little closer. The mains, I always find that a little bit higher pressure than what the book says. I think the book says like 3, something like that.
370?
The book says 85 on the nose, and the nose is way too high.
Yeah.
Yeah, they said 84.
It's closer to maybe 70.
Yeah. Next question. Larry.
Joel, while you're on the landing gear, book calls for 370 to 390, somewhere in there. A couple of the guys that I've talked to, because you get the little wing droop thing going on, they raise the pressure, they go up to about 400, 410. It makes the gear substantially stiffer, but you don't have to deal with the wing droop thing.
I think it's more like a little bit extra fluid, seems to make it a little bit more stable. Yeah, and I
think with that, I have to go a little bit higher in pressure, right? Because I'm putting probably a little bit more fluid. Once you do that, I mean, you get, I don't know, inch and a half of movement between empty and full. So it's,
But you also don't want it too far extended, because the further the torque links, the straighter the torque links are, the weaker they are. The further they are folded, the stronger they are.
they all right.
And just, I know all of us guys have gone through airplanes that have come through our shop repetitiously, but we have found in the earlier days, the upper and lower torque link bolts are so corroded, you take the bolt in the middle and you can hardly move the torque links when they're disconnected from each other. And that stiffens it up considerably, so make sure that the upper and the lower mainline of your torque links are moving. I think, Sandy, you got Sandy's deal on yours?
The lot that causes that is the mechanics grease the pinpoint grease fittings. And a lot of mechanics just put the grease gun on there and pump grease, and it doesn't go in, they just go to the next one. As long as the bronze bushings or the plastic bushings, you don't have to grease, but as long as you have the bronze bushings and you know you're getting grease there, the bolts don't corrode. But if you don't service them the way they're supposed to service, that's when they corrode, and that's when you can't move the torque.
So as far as torque links go, apparently according to the Airstar aircraft, I replaced more bolts on torque links and bushings than anybody else. And what I've found is that, like Don said, they're really tight. Whether it's corrosion, that may be one cause, but more often than not, I find that people crank down that 3/4 inch nut because there's so much slop in the bushings, and they're like, hey, I know how to tighten this. And they just crank that thing down, they squeeze the torque links together, and you can't move them. When I change torque link bushings, and, you know, upper or lower, I always replace the bolts, always. I think it's kind of cheap.
I think you have the record there with John.
Yeah.
I got the record on a lot of things.
I do, but here's the thing, so when Sandy Thompson was doing his, testing for all the bushings and everything, we put them in an Aerostar, in torque links, because that's the highest load, I believe, in the whole landing gear system. We actually blew out a couple of sets, but anyway, you know, with that knowledge of it being the highest load, and I mean, you kind of look at it and say, okay, you're trying to stop 5,000 pounds of shear force, you know, you're gonna pull pretty hard on the gear. We're pretty bright, like, I just replace the bushings, replace the bolts, I replace the center bolts. I've seen a lot of them bent. It's kind of cheap insurance in my book. But along with the corrosion, I found that people literally just try to crank it down as tight as they possibly can. And then you sit there and the you know, wings don't move, which is kind of nice sometimes.
What's the problem? That's the solution to the struggle.
Yeah, I mean, you get them right, so it's level, and then you just crank those bolts really tight, and it'll always be perfectly level.
What's the cost? You got aluminum welding rod?
What's that?
What's the proper torque on the bolts? How do you know when it's?
Well, I don't know what the exact torque is, so what we do is we put new bushings in, new bolts and new nuts, everything, and we tighten it down, and then we back it off until basically the torque rate just falls. There might be a little bit of load. I don't know if there's a necessarily exact torque.
Well, there's torque specs on the per bolt size, and that doesn't mean that we're gonna use that on the torque links.
But the thing, yeah, so there's a
Pretty
standard
big
torque, but it's an NAS, it's NAS 6208-54. And there's a standard torque for that bolt. However, the reality of it is, you know, you might have a little extra paint, age, you know, maybe the bushing is just a thousandths difference, something like that. So you may find that if you torque it to the correct, you know, torque on the nut, it actually makes the torque link itself too tight. Okay, because it's starting to squeeze that torque link in. So like I said, we tighten it down so it pulls the bolt away, and we let it up just a little bit and check, you know, basically how fast the torque link falls. Yeah, and then we do the same with the center bolt. It's a little more more difficult. We tighten it down and then back it off to about the next hole, because that has to come out.
Roger?
Every time I have a mechanic adjust it the way we're talking about right here, it was never right. One wing's higher, one wing's lower. But we were in Texas, driving back down the taxiway, the guy that was gonna fuel us up, Scorpion was coming down the road, because the tail was so high. And I kept screwing around with it. And what I did is I filled up all tanks. And then I set those things to.
Lori, take that microphone away from him.
This truss is 4 inches, and it sets fairly level. I don't have any problems with it, even though I could be totally wrong, it seems to work. Yeah, I'm done.
While we're on torque links, has anybody got problems with the main tires just scuffing the heck out of the insides of them still? You know how to fix that, don't you?
Yeah, but you don't want to take it all out.
No, you can, Jim can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the toe-in adjustment is no more than 1/2 a degree of toe-in.
How did you figure out when you're telling?
Yeah, and just plumb bob it, jacket, and just plumb bob it off the hanging down. And run some straight lines and put the protractor on. I mean, it's kind of fine tuning.
I haven't had the opportunity to know.
Ask Jim, he wrote the bulletin. Is that right, Jim?
There you go. There's the corporate response.
It says no more than 1/2 degree toe in. So, toe in.
Well, that's what now, there's a whole idea between the way the gear is designed. If the over center brace isn't set correctly, and you touch down, it's trying to suck the gear out more. If you toe it in, it's gonna try to pull it in.
So the manual says 2 washers.
Is it, okay, toe out, I'm sorry. Is it 2 or 3 washers?
2 washers.
Two thick
I thought it
washers.
was too thick on one part.
Yeah, I'm with Jimmy, 2 thick and 1 thin.
Whatever you do, don't touch anything.
I'll offer what I hope is a constructive suggestion about the gear thing. If you look at the gear, the way the wheels are on the outside, and you imagine when you touch down, all that force is trying to twist the wheels out. And in fact, it twists the wheel or the tire, so it scuffs the inside dramatically if they're not rigid as can be. So an experiment I did one time, with a lot of help from IA, was we put the gear wheels, the main gears, on a grease plate, metal grease, put the wheels down, and rigged up a thing with a long piece of wood and a wrapped on laser, and put a mark on the hanger, 150 feet away, and then measured the distance between the 2 laser marks to see if they were the same as that, and discovered that you could take any kind of a 2x4 rope arrangement and try to twist the gears out to simulate load that you have, and or pull the whole airplane forward with braking brakes on it, with a little bit of load on that, and you can get a considerable, an inch difference between the projected pier length width 100 yards apart. So what it boils down to is that the more slop there is, and of course the gears extended all the way and relatively easy to wiggle back and forth when it switched down, the more slop there is, the more chance you're going to get it twisted out and twist the wheel. And the only solution I could rationalize as a maybe engineer was to have no toe in, no toe out when I've got a load on it. And even so, the tires wear on the inside because the tires twist. So I don't know what the answer is, but it's certainly true that the landing load on those, because the wheels are not on the center of that well, is considerable and it's a twist. And of course, the more pressure you got and the higher you set, you got more torque on it. But there's more load on it because of the small angle that you pointed out. So I guess this is sort of a speech, but what it boils down to is, as Joel has said, any slop in that whole linkage system, the strut and all that, is not a good thing to have. But I'm not sure that if you were to make it real tight, that's not going to slow down the airplane compressing it very much. It might do something, corrode it and so forth. But what I've been frustrated about is that once people start talking about the number of washers, what they really want is the toe in and toe out, and that is very difficult to measure. And we have a laser set up 100 yards away. And I don't think you can do that with a protractor and a string.
Why don't you just see how the tires wear? If the tire, one tire is wearing worse than the other, you can put on the washer.
No, it'll be the same. Ours are the same.
Yeah, but yours might be the same, but not everybody else's are.
It's an airplane, yeah. So I don't think, the solution to this is that if there's slop in that linkage system, as you well pointed out, it's not a good thing to have. And, but even when you get it out, you're likely to wear it on the inside, at least we have.
You're supposed to wear it inside.
Yes.
And you gotta rotate, so you get the most light out of it.
Well, the only slop it is in the torque links or in the big trimming on the top. And we have seen, we put a couple of those the increased gross weight doublers underneath the wings. And of course, you've got to inspect all those trimmings aft and forward and aft, and install a panel through that spar. And we've looked back there on the ones that we've done, and those rivets were just loose as a goose. Yeah. So the hook bolts had to go in there. So and it kind of made sense. I kind of started thinking all the taxiing around I've done over the years and years, and you hear this little kind of creak and a click. Very well could be those
George.
trunnion plates.
Thank you.
So, but you can't get into it until you put that inspection panel in there.
Another subject, next question. Larry?
This one's for Joel.
This is not for Joel, and this is not my question because I don't have the guts required to ask this question. But one of our participants online would like to know if Lycoming recommends lean up peak operations and how you guys feel about lean up peak operations.
Lycoming does not recommend lean at peak operations.
I'm not a lean peak guy. I know some of my customers fly lean peak, but I'm not a lean peak guy. I don't know about you, Don.
And I'm not very lean, as you can see, so I don't agree either. Although there's a lot of folks out there that I've talked to, and probably you have too. I get asked the same question. Do you go over the top and down the back? Low compression engines, I don't do it on a high compression engine. That's just flat unallowed. Low compression, harder to detonate, below 15,000 and 65% power is probably the limits that I've talked to pilots that say, yeah, I'll go over the top and down the back side. But 15,000 feet below and 65% power or less. Or otherwise, they all seem to have the same consensus that I do. It just feels like it's just lugging it. And you got to commit yourself if you go over the top like everybody says. You got to go to at least 1,600 degrees TITs, or those turbines, or the turbos that can last very long. So all you're doing now is pumping air instead of fuel.
I thought it's the high compression ones that can go in the big and the low compression.
That's correct.
So, well, and I know Forrest Ward used to run lean peak all the time. He swore by it, but I'm just not a lean peak guy. And I think the low compression engines we have to run at 45% or less.
55% or less.
55% less.
Yeah. And so
About lean peak?
I think one of these days what we need to do is invite a cylinder overhauler to our meeting and talk about this. What I've seen of the cylinders that run Lena Peak, they turn out to be junk. They're totally they're totally worn out, because fuel's not only a combustible and a coolant, it's also a lubricant. That's my opinion, and that's the opinion of the guys in Bethany, Oklahoma.
Just to follow up on that, a friend of mine that does engines overhauls in Orlando, he sees engines, people that run new engines, new peak. He's doing top overhauls between 400 and 600 hours on those cylinders, and they're usually junk. He has to put new cylinders out.
This would be a good question for Bill Wagner tomorrow, who's an engine builder. That'll be here tomorrow to talk to us. Go ahead, Joe.
So in my experience, as limited as it is, engines that are running lean at peak, it seems like I have more valve issues and things like that. I strongly don't recommend it. I think there was even a write-up a guy did in Flying Magazine on Bonanza, and he took it as true airspeed versus running, rich at peak and lean at peak. And if you calculate the extra hours and the extra time that it takes you and things like that, and you really put a dollar value to everything, you're really not saving a whole lot. And I think, you're trying to cool the engine, with oxides, which are very corrosive. So I think there's issues with that. I think you get hot spots on the valves. I mean, that's been my experience. So I strongly do not recommend it. The same as I've had conversations with them. They're right up the road from us, so, the guys come down every once in a while, and we have conversations, and never once have they said it was a good idea.
Yeah. Fuel is still the cheapest part of owning an Aerostar.
I never run lean peak either. But if you talk about running lean peak, drawing 55% power, is it pulling the throttle back to say, wait, okay? Is it pulling the throttle back to 55%? The same thing as lean peak where you're getting 5%?
You're gonna go a little slower Lena Peak than you will just by pulling the throttle back to 55%. So you use a little less gas. But I'm just not a Lena Peak guy, so I'm not gonna agree with anybody that wants to run Lena Peak. If they want to run Lena Peak, have at it. Yes, it's your money. Spend it the way you want to.
I'll be the minority view, as a longtime Lena Peak operator, I swear by it. I had years, the last engine to come off was approximately 3 or 4 years ago. I put about 400 hours on that engine. And then the block crack, all that time I operated very aggressively in the peak. I brought Bill Wagner, and when he took it apart, he said to me, all your cylinders are perfect. You don't need to do anything, and I'm amazed at how clean the engine is. It's a shame that the block crack, because there's no reason it needs to be here. So, Lena Peak is not primarily a fuel cost saver. It is a filth avoider. Leaded fuel, which happily will soon be behind us, according to George Braley, we heard yesterday, that may make this benefit inconsequential, but there's a lot of garbage in leaded fuel, and all of it likes to accumulate in the cylinders and it causes the stuck valves when the fuel deposits accumulate on the valve guides and such. That militates in favor of minimizing the introduction of fuel into the engine, and Lena Peak accomplishes that very successfully. Now, heat is the enemy. That's what destroys any component. It's not the type of operation. And it's easy to screw up operating Lena Peak by introducing excessive heat, because you have 6 cylinders, and they're all going over that center, that hot point at different times. The purpose of gas injectors, of course, is over that center, that hot point at different times. The purpose of gas injectors, of course, is to bring them closer. Really. The purpose of gas injectors, of course, is to bring them.
Don, turn that mic off.
Gas injectors make that spread between different cylinders different so that they go over more closely at the same time. The object of the exercise is to make sure all 6 cylinders get over the hump sufficiently to make sure they're all cool enough, which means you're always going to be operating based on your rigid cylinder. If your rigid cylinder is sufficiently lean of heat, that means all the other cylinders are cooler. And as long as we don't have heat, we don't have burn valve guides, and all the problems that we associate. But we still get all of the benefits of not introducing unnecessary contaminants into the engine and all the added products. So I am of the view that very strongly that lean of heat actually minimizes or reduces maintenance when conducted properly. In order to do that, of course, you must have an engine monitor. You must be a hawk on CHPs. That is the key. If the CHPs are always sufficiently cool, then the engine will run very, very nicely. The one thing you'll give up is maybe about 5 to 10% of your airspeed, but that's the trade-off for the benefits. You have a cleaner engine, you have lower maintenance bills, you have lower fuel bills, and there's no other offsetting disadvantage. So I couldn't advocate clean heat more strongly, I swear.
Hold on, Don. Hold on a minute. I want to ask him a question. William, do you fly Lena Peak at 25,000 feet with your 601P?
I do.
Wow.
Our flight fuel profile at 25,000 feet is usually about 12.5 to 13 gallons per second. And that works very, very well. It does want to creep up, and that lasts from 23 to 25. Usually it's happiest between 12 and 12.5. And at that last 2,000 feet, it likes to go over 12.5 to 13 right there about. So it's a balancing act. You really have to watch the numbers. But as long as the CHCs are not, the engine is very, very happy, and it even sounds happy. They don't have this the vibration that we're all very concerned about. My experience is that they burn very, very nicely. They sound like they are a lot cleaner. And the proof is in the pudding. They are in fact cleaner. But we also have borescoped all those cylinders, and they have a nice even pattern. The gale guides are very, very clean. There's no discernible evidence of damage. So my feeling is that is the information on Lena Peak has not been published sufficiently. Mike Bush is a big advocate of those techniques, and I'm an advocate of it.
Well, I'll concur with most of your comments there. A lot of us know a guy named Ed Eaglin. He's an Aerostar owner. He's not flying an Aerostar now. He owned 10EJ. And I took care of Eddie Eaglin for many, many, many years. And Eddie was above, he was always Lena Peak, just like you were doing, and he had a Superstar 700 with the low compression engines. And he went everywhere from, where was it, Myrtle Beach, all the way down nonstop into Mexico to go bird hunting with 4 guys, 2 dogs, 6 shotguns, and thousands of rounds of ammo. And he did it all the time, and I had really, come to think of it, very little cylinder work at all, if any on it. And so, in theory, I agree with you. You've got to have a good 12-point or 6-point EGT CHT, a good digital fuel flow, and one thing that I didn't hear you say, you got to have a gamming nozzle as far as I'm concerned. Okay. And if you've got all of those, I used to do, and Ken can tell you, for about 5 years I flew, I did pilot service for a gentleman who bought a Superstar, and I flew from Columbus, Georgia, nonstop to Tulsa Riverside Airport at least every Tuesday.
98 Romeo Delta, yeah.
At least, and sometimes twice a week, nonstop, no long range Mach fuel tank. And when I left Columbus, I was in the fuel management mode from the time the wheels left the ground. And then once the GPS, time to station, and the fuel meter said time to flame out, and I couldn't get time to station greater than time to flame out, then I went into Gammy mode. That's what I called it. And then it was back on the power, over the top, down the backside. And you're right, you're 13.5, 14 gallons a side. The only thing different with me flying that Superstar is I would be at 15,000. The airplane the motors didn't sound like they were really liking it above 15,000 15,000. So that's why I put my 15,000 and 65% power. And I did it for 5 years with that airplane.
If you don't have the Andes, what happens is depending on your engine, the spread could be great enough.
That's
so
right.
that By the time you get the richest cylinder over the peak, well, the Venus one is
Yeah.
not fired.
Yeah, and you're, like I say, you're committed until you get the last cylinder
Right.
over the top and back down the backside.
The other benefit I would offer is range. You know, we forget about saving on gas. We're all going to spend money on gas. That's why we get aerosol. We're not trying to save money on gas. So when the nice thing about Clean and Peak is range. I have 7 hours of flight time in my airplane. So I flew from my home in northern Illinois to Calgary on business, and I made one fuel stop in North Dakota. So, and I didn't take gas fare when I got there. So it's really a great feature when it counts the problem.
I think most of the modern airplanes sold now running Clean and Peak. I mean, the whole-
Hold it. One at a time, guys. Go ahead.
I've been running my V2A engine, the about 200 hours now, so I don't have a lot of experience. The biggest thing I noticed is the cylinder run fluid, and my range is significantly increased. I maybe lose 10 knots, but, I still am going 240 knots. And I run when the big up to 25,000 feet without any problem. The engine runs smooth. I fairly consistently, anytime I take the couplings off, I pull the plugs and look at the horoscope, the exhaust pad, and the oil. That's like that. I don't have that much experience with what I've done so far. And a lot of people, like the Camry guys, I mean, they run test engines on stands for weeks at a time, or that's a problem. It's tens.
I'm good. I'm not going to keep going.
Yeah. Well, it only makes sense when you pull the mixtures back and go up and over the top and down the backside. What are you doing? Taking the fuel away. Take the fuel away, you take the power away, take the heat away, and everything cools back down. So you can't be burning it up. So, that's my philosophy. I used to run 65% power, in the peak, only in those circumstances.
George?
The downside, of course, is you lose speed.
Yeah.
And I read an article about 10 years ago, and it posed the question to the audience: are you one of those strange people that fly fast airplanes and fly them slowly?
Yeah, I agree.
Only try to get from point A to point B without.
George,
Okay?
come forward.
It's only.
Thomas, hold up your hand. Tom, hold up, bring it up here. Second row.
So how's this new fuel, no lead, going to affect Clean and Peak operation, if at all?
I'm pretty sure when George was talking the other day, he liked Lean to Peak with new fuel. But he's a Lean to Peak guy, and he's one of these guys that developed again the injectors, so, you have to take everything with a grain of salt, but he's suggesting that it's gonna be better Lean to Peak than the 100 low lead.
Do any of you have an opinion on that, other than yours?
What did you get out of it?
Regarding Clean and Peak
Try to get out of what?
That
George,
conversation.
George Braley? Yeah, it's a given that you take the lead out of fuel, it's going to be cleaner. And most likely you'll get more range out of it. I think he's got a good point.
So that diminishes the benefit of running Clean and Peak with lead in it. You're taking that option out. You're not gonna be any lead in it. So the benefits now currently of running Clean and Peak is less cleaner. Right.
Who knows? We may get there.
Yeah, but George still said his fuels runs cleaner, whether it be Lean to Peak or Richer Peak, but he said at the Lean to Peak mode, he said it's more efficient than 100 low lead, if I heard him correctly, but I believe that's what he told us.
That's what he said.
There's more energy.
Yeah, there's more energy per. Yeah, it's a little bit heavier as well.
Okay, next question. Roger?
Yeah, I'd like to say something about the strut business. I was talking to Bill back there, the leads, and when we were starting on the Aerostar, a lot of those numbers that you come up with, the CCs of the hydraulic fluid, the pressures and so forth, and a lot of things like that, they come out to write the manual, they come out and ask the guys in the shop and everything, oh, you know, they come up with some numbers and so forth. So those things came up kind of arbitrarily, and it was kind of consensus, the guys in the shop that came up with some of these things. And in our shop in Van Nuys there, we adjusted that stuff, you know, constantly. We changed the number of CCs and the pressures, and we didn't raise those things up like this because it makes them look good. We ran them pretty low. And then I do this. I use a jump rope, and we put a little bit of hydraulic fluid on the jump rope, and when the struts are extended out, you wrap this around the piston a couple of times, and you pull it back and forth and polish the crap off those things, especially if it's jacked up and you can get the whole thing. Because that hydraulic fluid gets all that dust and junk on there, and it gets up into the O-rings, and that causes resistance too. So we had one customer who would, he sump his tanks and he'd wipe the struts down with gasoline. We tried to stop him from doing that all the time, and he'd roll the O-rings, and he wouldn't listen. He was a clean freak. He'd wipe the bugs off before a flight, and he'd wipe them off after a flight. There was never any bugs on the airplane. But he would wipe his struts, or his pistons off with the gas, and it would, and finally, after about 3 times of us trying to stop him, he rolled the O-ring and it damaged the groove the O-ring goes in on the strap. And we had to replace the darn thing because it changed the dimension and started leaking all the time. So this is what we used. And I would give people a set of these, and this, and keep in their baggage compartment. And once in a while, they clean those things off, get the dust and, you know, you put a little hydraulic fluid on here, WD-40 something, a lubricant, not gasoline, and you run those things back and forth and polish them up and down. That's how they polish spokes on old cars and stuff like that. So you just wrap it around once or twice, and then pull it back and forth, up and down. It's a simple, stupid thing, but that saves a lot of problems. So the fact that the 22 cc's or 12 cc's, the hydraulic fluid you can adjust that up and down, and the pressure up and down to where it works right. That's what you do. And the scissors and all that stuff, you make those right, and that's what works. And it was arbitrary. A lot of this stuff came from the shop in 1960s, and they didn't change the manuals necessarily after that. They just put in what the guys in the shop would say. Whether they were right or wrong, a lot of that stuff was just
Arbitrary, yeah.
Yeah.
Good. I want to pose a question to you,
Oh, yeah, hydraulic.
Don.
Sir? Say it again?
Question for you.
Go ahead.
How do you determine whether your fuel valves are working properly or not
Well,
as a pilot?
as a pilot, periodically, just pull up and instead of pulling the mixtures, turn the fuel selectors off. Just sit there at 1,000 RPM and see.
Give him the mic, kid, Jimmy.
See how long, in other words, if you didn't hear me back there, every once in a while, I'll go ahead and just pull up to my parking spot.
As a pilot.
As a pilot. And pull up, instead of pulling the red levers, the mixtures, I'll just turn the fuel shut-off valves off. And see how long it takes before the motor starts bucking and kicking and fighting, and then the fuel pressure starts coming down and down and down. Matter of fact, we came in here with 700 GDC and went to shut it down, wasn't it? And couldn't get one. I didn't think neither one of them would shut off.
How do you test the crossfeed though?
Huh?
How do you test the crossfeed though?
Crossfeed valve? Yeah, well, keep running if it's leaking.
If the engine keeps running, you've got a crossfeed valve, you've got a valve that's not closing properly.
Be turned off. When you turn them off, they're both off. Turn it on, the on-off valve comes on. Turn it off, and it doesn't shut down, then the valve, one of the valves is open, and the motor's still getting fuel.
I think that's the cross feed elevator, it's opening and the main one's closing when it's cross feed. Is there any way
But how do you tell?
Which valve it is.
Which valve it is, but you can turn it in cross feed and make sure it's still run.
Yes.
And then when you turn it to off, it should shut off, but we check them in annual as well. When you got the kidney valve open, it's got an indicator on the top, or if you got a Duke's valve, the indicator's on the top. If you got an ITD valve, it's got an alarm.
Little arm that swings up and down.
But even if the arm goes down, it's leaking, you won't know.
Yeah.
Without shutting it off.
Could you turn it into cross feed on the ground and just stand, sit there for like 10 minutes and see if
Yeah, the Caesar keeps running, yeah.
it keeps running? What does that mean?
These cross feed valves are open.
So in crossfeed, the main valve's closed, okay? So you can sit, if you turn it to crossfeed and everything runs normal, and then you turn it to off and everything shuts off, I'm screwed. Most likely everything's working. Because in the on position, your crossfeed valves are closed, okay? You switch to crossfeed, the on valves are closed, crossfeed valves will open, okay? The engine keeps running, everything's great. Turn it back to on, crossfeed valve will close, turn it to off, and it should shut off like Don said. And then you pretty much know, I mean, I guess, yeah, because the on valve would be turning off, the crossfeed valve is also turning off because they're already off. The other thing, during a brief flight, you can switch the valves on the ground, you should be able to hear the horns. If it's a Duke's valve, you should be able to hear ITT, or the motor, you'll hear the, it's like a sound. And if you don't hear that, then you may have a valve that's not working. The Duke's valves are pretty.
They're tough to hear.
Well, it's pretty common that the horns are, they don't work.
But also, if you have a bad Duke's valve and you turn it to on or cross feed and the buzzer does not stop, it's usually a valve that's bad.
Well, yeah.
I've seen that, with a Duke's valve.
So it's pretty common for the Dukes, so you have a cam in there, and there's two micro switches, and there's a flat, or it's not a cam, it's basically a circular.
A ball valve. A ball valve?
No, on the back side of the ball valve, there's a round piece that basically has a flat spot. That flat spot turns and it'll trip one micro switch and, untrip the other one. A lot of times what will happen is there's just because of how it's designed and the fact that you have, you can change the position of those switches a little bit and it'll keep the valve from moving a proper amount. And it's literally a couple of thousandths between not opening correctly and not tripping the switches correctly. So what will happen is you'll turn it one way or the other, and it'll sit there and it'll continue to try to run because the switches aren't either adjusted right or the switches fail.
You're the one that overhauls Duke's valves, so you know a little more about it than I do.
Gary?
Because I just know when they don't work.
Gary, go ahead.
My valve, I don't have any indication that my valves are malfunctioning, but you mentioned the sound. On my left valve, I hear a small motor zzz when I turn the valve on or off. On my right valve, it's silent. I hear nothing.
What year is your airplane?
1970.
It's a 1970, so it should have ITT valves in it, but somebody might have put a Duke's valve in as well.
That's right.
The Duke's valves are very quiet compared to the ITT
One
valves.
side is silent, one side, and I asked my mechanic, and he went, I don't know.
The next time he looks at it, ask him if the valve is silver or red.
He quit, and that's my mechanic.
Okay, next time Ken looks at it.
And you.
We'll see if they're silver or red, then you know if they're Duke's or ITT.
And
ITT is noisy.
Okay, so it could be just two different things.
Yes, you can switch valves for ITT and Duke's.
Jimmy, I owe you a beer. That's exactly right what they did. They substituted the ITT valve. Obviously, they couldn't find one and put a Duke's in. That's what's going on.
But
if you have Joel overhaul the Dukes, he puts a new buzzer in.
Yeah,
You can hear him, you can't hear him with the motors running, you can't hear when the motor's running, but the Dukes valves are very quiet, even with the buzzer, but you can hear them with the buzzers working. When the buzzer's not working, you can hardly even hear the valve.
if you have a yeah, because they replaced one of your valves as a Dukes valve. 78 model airplanes and newer have Dukes valves for the most part. 77 and older have ITT valves,
But they're all interchangeable.
but they're all interchangeable.
So you can have, like Jimmy said, you can have an old, 1969 Aerostar with Dukes valves, or you can have an 84 with ITT. Yeah. It just depends on what was available and what wasn't leaking and what Jimmy decided to send you.
Yeah, because I have maybe one, it has the ITT.
Yeah, I actually prefer the ITT.
It's nicer to hear.
They're louder, less problems with them. The real problems with the ITTs are they leak. But we reseal them all and replace all the O-rings, and we put a core of silicone in, so that they can be used for either fuel or hydraulic valve.
So you're repairing ITT valves as well?
Yeah.
Okay. Aircraft Accessories of Oklahoma does them too. William is the maintenance guy who takes care of them.
From a pilot standpoint, how many of you guys get in the airplane and before you do anything, you put your headset on? Good.
Good.
Don't fly with me if you do, because I'll take it off your head for you. I like to hear noises and valves and whatnot. Once the motors are running and the doors closed locked and inflated, then put your headset on. Because we got these Bose headsets and you can't hear anything when you put them in those.
I have to start my right engine with the upper door open to make sure I hear, somebody could be yelling at me or something. And I want to be able to hear it.
Oh, they yell at me all the time. Don't worry.
What?
Your jocks are at.
I usually start the left engine. I start the left engine with the upper door open. If it doesn't have AC in the south. Yeah.
Bob?
Pull the headsets off once in a while when you're going cross country, take a listen.
Yes.
I have way too many problems that way. Once in a while, pop off, listen for a few seconds, and they sound okay.
Bob Bliss.
There's another trick too. If you look out at the prop governor on the right engine, and it's fairly still, you're pretty good, but if it's bouncing all around, there's something wrong. And the number one cylinder on the left side. So every once in a while, you just take a look.
Bob Bliss.
When you shut down for the day, should you shut the fuel valve off?
Oh, I do. The checklist says it. What happens if the gas caps are opened up and you get a deluge with the fuel valves on and enough water gets in there to consume, again, it's hypothetical. If you consume more than a quart of water, where's that water going beyond the sump? It's going into the fuel filter and it's going right up into the servo. So yes.
Gary?
If I don't turn my valves off, my fuel will move from the high wind to the low wind.
Yeah.
Is that normal?
No, mine does it too. If it goes from left wing to right wing, it's usually the left wing cross feed valve. I think is what we figured out. No, the right wing cross feed valve.
It's just high and low.
Yeah, mine started that about a month ago. And I'm come taxiing in, my airplane was outside, I couldn't get it in the shop, there had too many airplanes in there. And I taxied up, and my right wing was just laid right down. I said, oh, what the heck happened here? I thought I popped some seals in the strut, and I'm looking, and there's no hydraulic fluid dripped all over the place. So I turned around and I popped the cap, whoa, the low wing was full. So I walked over, turned the battery switch on, and of course the right wing's full, the left one's empty, or way low. So I had to get it with a little tripod jack with a jack pad on it, and I jacked the airplane up so it was nice and level, and set it there for about 3 days. And I'll run back to the other side, turn the switches on.
But that's what your valve's on.
With the valves closed, it was running back and forth.
Yeah, If he shuts his valves, it doesn't move.
You close the valves,
If I close the valve, they don't move. If I leave the back, inadvertently leave the valves open,
Roger,
then that's
Roger,
when
that's the.
well, does the fuselage go down or just the wings to wings? Because you've got those flapper valves, and if one of the flapper valves and on the wing sump, does it go from left to right or right to left?
high and low.
Okay,
Roger, check the answer.
okay, Roger, give him the answer.
Goes through the flapper valves.
Yeah,
That's what the valve is open.
With your fuel selector
The
valves.
selector, my selector, my fuel selector valves, they're open.
Uh-huh.
My fuel will move. If I close them like I should, the fuel doesn't move.
Okay, if they're closed and it moves, then it's the fuel selector valves. If it's open and it moves, then it's flapper valves. Is that what you're saying, Roger?
It can go through the flapper valves closed or open.
Yeah.
And they only got.
And especially if it's just slightly leaning, because the weight of the flapper valve seals better when the flapper valves off of 90. If they're all sitting 90 degrees, it can go easier, or just slightly.
There's only little tiny O-rings on the flapper valves, no strings.
And there's no springs that hold those line valves closed. So if you're leaning one way or the other, they'll lean just a little
And
bit.
if you want to change them, it's real big.
let's move on to a different subject. We worn that one out. Okay, you've got a engine-driven air conditioner compressor on the right engine. And how can you tell when the engine mounts need to be replaced?
The pressure's coming through the bottom of the valves. You know that.
Take the mic and tell me about it.
Well, if the engine mounts are wearing out, the engine's gonna.
You're not turning, is the thing on?
If the engine mounts are worn out, the engine's gonna sag. The closest thing to the fiberglass nose ball is gonna be that AC compressor. It'll start wearing a hole through the bottom outboard, fiberglass nose bowl.
Oh, you 2 beers tonight, Jimmy. That's 2 you got right.
I get lucky once in a while.
If you're seeing wear through the fiberglass of the air conditioner pulley on the right engine, you need engine mounts.
So, but I've seen Ken also where. So.
Well, there's other areas.
When you put the engine-driven compressor on, you actually cut out a large hole from the cowling.
Right.
Some people, the bulge is quite noticeable, and you might, it's like obvious. And then there's other Aerostars out there that have it, but they cut the they put that fiberglass, it's, like a fiberglass bulge, you get it from Aerostar aircraft, that's part of the kit. And they'll cut it, and they'll kind of put it off in a little different.
Put it in the wrong
Yeah,
spot.
a little different position, so it doesn't look so bad. And it makes it, even with new engine mounts, it can be very close.
It should not go through the bottom. That's what the whole purpose of the bubble patches is all about.
Yep. So that's.
I don't have that listed on the,
Well, then that's,
yeah, I just sang around.
it's just not very far away from.
Fuel servo. Who's next? Fuel servo, fuel inside the air chamber, the fuel servo. It had nothing to do with the fuel servo. Where did it come from?
The vertebrae, the spider up top.
No.
You got fuel stains on your fuel servo, exterior and interior, and there's fuel in there, and it didn't come from the fuel servo. Where did it come from? You got fuel stains on the fuel servo, the bottom of it. Where'd the fuel come from that caused the problem?
Well, you can't see it unless you pull the bellows off.
Well, you don't have to pull the bellows off if it's external.
It could be, external.
Yeah, it's external as well as internal. It's been leaking long enough. You even got a rough idle problem.
A rough idle the fuel pump went bad, it would not. It would run okay.
Now you're getting there.
It would not idle with a fuel pump.
We have a reference line from the diaphragm of the fuel pump that goes to the J duct. So the Romex fuel pump diaphragm has failed. Does everybody understand that? Go ahead, Don, explain it to them.
I had an airplane, guy just dropped it off. I had no idea he was coming. And I was walking out there, so I said, I don't know who this guy is. And he walks out, and all of a sudden, his flight bag goes out, hits the ground. Next thing, his little overnight bag goes out, hits the ground. And I'm kind of standing there, I walk up, he's a young fella. I said, can I help you? He goes, yeah, you Don Smith? I said, yes. He goes, well, here's the airplane. He said, well, did I have you on the schedule? He goes, no. He says, I don't need it no more. I'm just bringing it over here and you can do what you want to do with it. I said, how much you want for it? Well, just whatever you can get for it. And I said, He says, the motors are running. It's just oil leaks. Just, I don't need it no more. I bought a Cheyenne when I had black masses and spent my $2.2 million. I don't need it now. I said, So I started looking around the airplane, and I knew something was wrong, and it was fuel related without even starting. When he had the oil, the sniffer valve, and it had intercoolers on it, so the sniffer valve is screwed in the side of the induction pan. Okay? And instead of having that rubber hose that runs to the back by the exhaust tunnel area, he had an aluminum tube that he bent and came down and drilled a hole in the bottom cowling, and it was sitting there. And I kind of looked at that and I said, what the hell is that there for? He goes, well, every time you shut down, the fuel just runs out of that damn tube. I was afraid it was going to catch fire in the cowling. And Aircraft Accessories of Oklahoma, here it comes 2 fuel pumps. I pulled them both off and sent them to them. I couldn't even run. They wouldn't even run. And I had no idea how. And he came from, I don't know where, somewhere up north.
They weren't pretty good at full power. They don't run very
Oh,
good.
they just stumbled and kicked and fight and buck.
Yeah, usually full power, you're okay, but because you got your boost pumps on blowing through the bypass of the Romex fuel pump.
Just dripping around, the servo. That's generally where it's coming from, the vent line that's running into the J duct. And then it's just sitting there collecting in the induction system.
Does anybody else got another question?
I have a question relating to fuel. I just flew this aircraft from Coeur d'Alene across the North Atlantic last week, and one thing that was a pleasant surprise is that after you reach cruise and wait for things to cool down and turn off the boost pumps, you didn't need to reset the mixture. The fuel flow, TIT, stayed absolutely stable when you turn the boost pumps off. In my aircraft, I have a noticeable drop off in fuel flow and have to reset the mixtures. I'm just wondering what's normal and what are other people's experiences with that?
Well, you had that out-of-sight warranty from Coeur d'Alene, right?
That's a general rule with the flying that I've done. Every time I get, boost pumps are on in the climb, in the cruise, then you pull back, get into cruise power, let it sit there for a while, and then about 5-10 minutes, and then you flip the boost pumps off one at a time. And I pay attention to the TITs, or the actual EGT TITs, and it moves up, the fuel flow will go down. And then you go, okay, I gotta make an adjustment. So generally speaking, in most Aerostars that I fly, that's the scenario. So yours not moving at all is probably outstanding in mine.
First of all, stop just a minute. First of all, what's your POH say about turning those boost pumps off?
I was trained to leave them on for 20 minutes after top of climb, and then.
But what's your POH say?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
POH says to leave the boost pumps on over 15,000.
In the 700P. In the 700P. Right, Jerry? Okay.
I thought it was 10,000 in the 601.
It's not true of all the models. No.
I thought it was 10,000 feet to 601. No, you're supposed to leave them on, over 10,000 feet, you're supposed to leave them on. That's not, it's in the POH.
They can buy those damn pumps.
Yeah, I know, I still try to shut them off. But
Yeah, I keep them on, it's, I'm seeing fuel about 20.
Lori?
Boost pumps high, boost pumps low, and off. Over 15,000 feet, and we were trained to just have them on low.
on low.
Unless you're random, you put them on high in case you have to go on.
And that's where the Super 2.
Right.
James
So
will
it's
be
not
the,
right.
yeah. And your low boost pump is our high boost pump for a stock standard P model, the 2B6-6.
I'm almost afraid to ask. Jack again.
My boost pumps are off, switch, high and low, but high and low boost pumps are identical boost pumps. So I don't have a low boost pump. I didn't like that very much. But as this gentleman describes, at any altitude, with the boost pumps on and climb, give it 20 minutes, half an hour, and I turn off the boost pumps. And my EGT's manifold pressures are stable and don't wiggle.
But what's your POH say?
I don't care.
That's the typical answer. There you go.
Quick question. On my airplane, I'll be flying along, and when you shut off the boost pumps, TIT, everything stays the same, but the right engine fluctuates on the right engine fuel pump.
Pressure or flow or both?
The pressure.
After how long? How long you flying straight level flight with boost pumps on?
Oh, 20 minutes or so, quite a while.
Because I've had that situation where if it starts fluctuating, I turn the boost pump back on.
Yeah, it goes away.
And then I'll try it again a little bit later and shut it off. Sometimes it's just not cool enough.
It's just not cool enough?
The fuel's not cool enough. The fuel is actually trying to boil in them little tiny injector
Okay,
lines.
that could be it, because it is somewhat intermittent, and then our fuel pump did start leaking. I put a new one on, and it did the exact same thing.
Yeah, but in my experience anyhow, is that the fuel in the little tiny injector lines tries to boil because the air is so hot on top of the motor. And that's why you're supposed to wait 20 to 30 minutes in the cruise flight before you try to shut boost pumps off.
Cool.
So I've had that issue where I shut it off and it started fluctuating, I turned it back on. I waited another 15, 20 minutes and shut it off, and it was okay. But the POH in my airplane, your 601P says over 10,000 feet, you're supposed to be on.
That's correct, yeah. I just did notice it fluctuated. It didn't seem to affect the performance. And the new pump did the exact same thing.
You know,
I will, one other experience on fuel, coming out of the fuel valve, I landed at a couple high altitude airports, and I landed at one, and the left engine died.
Did you rich in the mixtures?
Don't take my story away. I kept them somewhat rich for go around, right? And a little, they were pulled back some, but yeah, that's what happened. I opened the door and fuel's coming out of my engine. I thought,
And the first time I landed at a high altitude airport, taxiing off, one engine quit, taxiing in, the other one quit. And the FBO said, well, you're a flatlander, aren't you? And I said, what are you talking about?
We read the POH.
You can't reach your mixtures.
Boost pumps on, as required on during climb above 10,000. This is the 601P.
Yeah.
right.
Your year of 601P.
Yeah, well, this is specific to the 81.
Okay.
My
Absolutely.
first experience at a high altitude airport.
The other thing is turn boost pumps on. First indication of fluctuating of low, below 18, fuel pressure, fuel flow, on during climb above. So that's, again, as required, which is
And I
that one.
couldn't get started, I was taxiing in, the other one quit.
And the guy from the opening guy said, "You must be a flat
Boost
man."
pumps just a
And
requirement.
I said,
That's
you
all
know, I
it
guess
is.
I
But it
am,
also
but
says,
he said, you
it
can't
gives the
reach
same
next year
caution,
for
so
land.
that is part of the
Sure.
requirement.
And I know on turbocharged airplane, you're supposed to be full reach for takeoff. But after you get power in, not at idle. What's that? What's the POH say?
Well, POH says,
Quote, unquote.
Handing the microphone.
okay, this is the 601P specific to my aircraft, which is the 81601P. Under after takeoff, item 9, boost pumps as required, on during climb above 10,000 feet. Now, there's a caution here just below it that says turn boost pumps on at first indication of fluctuating or low, that is 18 psi or less, fuel pressure, fuel flow, or during climb above 10,000 feet. Again, this is just a two-position boost pump.
On or off.
Yeah, on or off, not the fancy one that maybe one of these days I'll actually put on 460.
So as a pilot, if we go to 15,000, 16, 17,000, and the fuel pressure and the fuel flow are steady, does that say keep it on?
No.
It says required. So if you don't require it, you can turn the damn thing on.
That's correct, and of course, if it's steady at 16 psi, then turn them on. But again, that's just something that you want to keep an eye on your gauge.
Sure.
But I was thankful to hear of the boiling fuel as you climb, and it helps explain some behavior that I've seen in my fuel flow needles, is they kind of bounce around until it stabilizes. Right. So I always known that they'd stabilize, but now I have the explanation of why, which means the fuel got cold enough that it's no longer trying to vaporize the lines.
The boost pump is actually pushing cold fuel from the back. The engine-driven pump is sucking fuel from the back, and it's in a hot environment, so it's pushing hot fuel up there. The boost pump is pushing the cold fuel to the mechanical pump.
Yeah, and the same, just to kind of go into the cruise part, the cruise checklist, it says boost pumps as required. PSI or less, fuel flow.
Not fair.
Are we clear? I've already suffered so much. I heard that memory is the second thing to go. As you age.
How many of you carry a spare boost pump with you as your spare parts in your airplane? 3 of us?
George, you don't
4 of
have
us?
one. You don't have one, because I have it on my desk, I gotta ship it. You got one last week.
If ever there's an item to carry, a boost pump, or install Jim Christie's low and high boost pump, it'll save your butt more often than you realize.
You can't start, you can get maybe started the first time, first start of the day, but if you go in, stop, take an hour's worth of business, come back, and the boost pump doesn't work, you're gonna play hell getting started.
It's gotta be cold.
Yeah, it's gotta be a cold start. Now, you can, I've had, and Ken's right, you'll get stuck. But I have taken a damn piece of surgical hose in an empty Coca-Cola bottle and filled them up, taken the top cowl, cracked it up, put it in the alternate air door, dumped a Coke bottle worth of fuel in there, quickly snapped it down and closed, jumped in and hit it. Yeah, hopefully you keep going.
And then it liquid locks and breaks a connecting rod. David?
I was able to, I had a boost pump go off, but you have a SkyTech high-speed starter. I was able to start.
Yeah.
Blast right through the hot start.
You can almost taxi with a light load of fuel.
How many of you check your P leads upon landing? Every time? Please do so.
One more data point on fuel pumps. I've got airplane number 504, which is a 601P. And I've got boost pumps as required for cruise. but there's a note that says it's recommended that boost pumps be turned off for crews unless the engine-driven pumps fail to maintain stable fuel pressure at or below 2 psi. Why? Because it says it in the book.
Why would that be recommended? Why is that?
Not to wear out pumps.
What it says, where on the pump is that?
Is that it? It ain't cheap, wears out from use.
Everything wears out.
I don't recommend doing what he says. I don't recommend it. I use my boost pumps above 10,000 feet. Dick?
On the initial certification on 400.
Somebody give him a mic. 92 years old.
Anyway, barrel thing, I can't help myself really. On the initial certification of the 400, I believe 600. On the hot fuel, and that was scary, just dump the hot fuel in the dark tank just to do these tests, but we certified without fuel pumps. And the reason for the great big tubing running from the sump to the engine is no restrictions, so the flow would be minimal on the engine, so we certify without boost pumps. It's in there for boost pumps, and we have a boost pump, but the reason, because I hear discussion, I wish all the engineers, before they design their airplane, would sit in meetings like this. It would really, really help.
Oh, thank you.
Now, the engineers, they design stuff and they laugh at the mechanics. Wait till they try to fix it.
Then they go upstairs and look out their window down there.
So
And they see you pulling your hair out, your hands torn up.
They let my committee, but I'm not gonna say yet, but when Jim starts up the Aerostar program and starts producing Aerostar, you guys need to tell him what you would do to make the airplane simpler and what improvements to make.
I want jet engines.
Well, I do too.
I gotta win the lottery first, but I want jet engines.
Anyway, so just for what it's worth in the fuel system, it's been fun to listen to this. It's so long, but it's been fascinating to listen. It's like, we've been the whole thing all over again.
Well, guys, it's 5 o'clock. We gotta get out of here unless you got really something quick. You got something quick?
I guess, hydraulic system. Look at a responsible gauge that actually reads the pressure. It's twin swipe with the aux pump off. You're seeing 1,000 PSI, and it runs up to about 1,100. Then it slows back to 1,000, up to 1,100. And am I anticipating doom, leaking, or is that the way it works?
It sounds like the regulators can be leaking by.
Regulator leak.
Yeah, the regulator has a bypass circuit in it.
A minute or less.
Or a piece of debris on the bypass valve.
Oh, before,
It's not gonna burst into flame, but it's something I gotta keep an eye on.
One thing that I do is I'll fly along with the flat lever in neutral. Every once in a while, I'll just put the flat lever up, just to see if I'm getting leak through one of the flat actuators. It might be something as simple as that. If you put the flat selector up and you're flying along, and it just feels like that, you've got a leaky flat actuator. Unfortunately, you can't do that with your gear.
we got to get out of here. It's 5 o'clock, but I got one more thing to share with you. If you're a gambler and you like $10 free from the casino, they're offering these $10 certificates free of charge. They'll be up here on the table if you want one. If your wives are, yeah. You can have this, yeah. You can have the stack. I'm not either. Say, Scott. Absolutely. Take a couple. Take 2 or 3, Walter. For here.
Oh, for gambling?
Yeah.
How are you doing?